Call this Thursday, September. I will call this Thursday, September 20th meeting of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission to order. And with that, we will start with public announcements.
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 1, approval of the prior MAPC minutes.
Second.
So I have a motion by Mr. McKay and a second by Mr. Bill Johnson. Yes, Mr. Foster.
Just want to make a note on page 13 related to the vacation assigned case that we had. The motion states to approve subject to the recommendation of the subdivision committee and staff recommendation. Those recommendations were to deny. Therefore, I would suggest rewording the motion that would relate to the approval. For example, to approve subject to reduction of request as presented by the applicant.
Thank you. So do I have a motion to
Amend the minutes.
amend the minutes? Yes. By Mr. McKay. Mr. McKay, are you okay with amending the minutes? Mr. Johnson, are you okay with seconding that motion? Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Motion carries 10-0. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 2, consideration of subdivision committee recommendations. I'm not loud enough. It's hard to hear. Okay, I'll talk louder. So item number 2-1, sub 2018 00031, one-step final plat, a day addition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? Okay, we'll take that item on consent. Item number 22, sub 2018-00032, one-step final plat, Kellogg, Illinois edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? Okay. Bring that back to the commission for action. Somebody like to make a,
Move to approve item 2-1 and 2-2.
Second.
have a motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Agenda item number 3, public hearing, vacation items. Kate,
Or none.
yeah, there are none. I see that. Number 4, case number CON 2018-00034, county conditional use to allow mining and quarrying on property zone SF20, single-family residential. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Yes, we will hear that case. Okay, number 5, case number CUP 2018-00037, city minor amendment to CUP DP 49 to increase the allowable square footage of signage on property zone LC limited commercial. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? Okay, we will take that on consent. Item number 6, case number ZON 2018-00034, county zone change from rural residential to general office. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? We will hear that case. Thank you. Item number 7, case number ZON 2018-00037, city zone change from LC limited commercial to GC general commercial. Variance for tattoo and body piercing facility. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? If not, yes? Are you the owner, applicant? Okay, unless there's no objection to that case. Okay, thank you. We'll take that case on consent. Agenda item number 8, case number ZON 2018-00038, city zone change from TF3 to MF29. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case?
I have a staff question on that item.
Is there anybody in the audience who would like to hear that case? Yes? Okay, we will hear that, we will hear that case. Case number ZON 2018-00039, city zone change from SF5 to LI limited industrial. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear that case? Okay, we will hear that case. So I will entertain a motion to hear items number 5 and 7.
5 and 7, I so move.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Jewell, a second by Mr. Green. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 11-0. All right, and Dave Uratt's going to present CON 2018-00034.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commission, members of the Commission, Dave Ura with planning staff. Conditional use case number 34. This is a request for a conditional use permit to permit mining and quarrying activity on property that's south of 55th Street South and west of essentially South Tyler. For anybody that might be on the commission going back far enough, and as it states in the staff report, this is a renewal of a permit that was approved in 2008. It had a 10-year time limit on it. That time has expired. The owner and applicant is asking to renew. This is the aerial of the property. It's the area that's subject to this conditional use is outlined in red. The entire ownership is kind of outlined in yellow. So not all of the land owned by the applicant is included in this application. This is a general location of the property from the future land use map. A look at the property looking south from 55th, kind of southwest at the site. This is looking southeast. You can see the tree row around the existing home that's at the corner of 55th and South Tyler. This is looking east along 55th Street and looking west along 55th Street. So the content of this operation is identical to what was approved 10 years ago, as is the case 10 years ago in the staff report we're indicating. Staff's recommending denial. We have an opposition on file from the airport authority officials, and I gave you guys in the staff report packet, you have emails regarding that activity. We do, however, give you the idea of conditions that could be attached if there is a desire to move forward with the request. And as I noted, this was approved 10 years ago, and they're back for a renewal. I don't know what else necessarily we need to say at this point, other than that's what's going on. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions from the commission?
Possibility that there will be some water on this if they start their mining and land clearing procedure. There will be a retention pond, am I right?
Well, it would result in water being held within the area being excavated, yes.
Subject to drawing files. Subject to drawing files, birds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Haley?
What is the water table there? Is this going
5
down
feet.
to the water table, or is
Yeah.
it just gonna be surface water that drains into it?
Well, I'd rather have the applicant or their agent address the details of that better than we can.
Any other questions from the commission? If not, I'd ask agent or applicant to step forward, provide your name and address, and you have 10 minutes to present.
Good afternoon, Russ Avey with Boffman Company, agent for the applicant. Again, as Dave mentioned, this was brought to us to simply renew the 10-year timeframe that runs out, I believe, in November of this year. If we recall, this was somewhat of a rudimentary undertaking 10 years ago, as it is today. We have often, what is often the case, we have these potential borrow pits that contractors will negotiate with landowners for specific projects. And 10 years ago, that specific project was the Columbus Jet program that Textron Aviation ultimately decided not to pursue. So this site, along with 3 other sites in the near southwest Wichita area, were approved for borrow pits. In this particular situation, the farmer that owns the property was looking for an agricultural pond for his livestock operations. And in exchange of that, he was selling the material off that site for use in construction projects for Meese Excavation. So although I have been asked by staff and the answer was no, we do not have a specific project at this time envisioned for this material. It again is the request to keep this as a source for future development projects. At the time, 10 years ago, that we had this approved, we had yet developed any type of policy or plan other than a reference to what I would characterize, and I'm not certain if anybody here on the commission has read that advisory circular from the FAA, but a somewhat vague directive from the FAA as it relates to attractorants of wildlife in and around airports. This particular site lies outside of the two more sensitive zones in that circular, and is mapped at least and I'm not sure if you have the airport hazard map. Okay, so online and through GIS is an airport hazard map that shows 4 different designations as it relates to these, as it relates to the FAA's concerns. And we are in the lesser area D. And in looking at that section of the various codes and requirements from the federal government and the local jurisdictions, one can see that it's kind of a catch-all. The primary intent of the section of code that Mr. Christopher of the Wichita Airport Authority issued as part of your packet, you'll see him referencing section 28.08 of the code. And again, if you read through that and you look at the mapping designations, what that, according, in my opinion, was to limit the height obstructions of the airport, the glide paths, if you will. Most all of the material in those sections deal with what a person can and cannot build from a height standpoint within those zones. But I'll go back to the circular. It does talk about, and we are in this zone, to where we simply can't allow any attractorants of wildlife that may or may not fly across the flight paths of the airports. And it spells out the various airports. Dwight D. Eisenhower Airport obviously is the one we're concerned with today. I will, however, mention that within the last 6 months, I was before you to talk about a sand extraction operation that also had a soil extraction operation near 55th and Clifton, which is about 5,000 feet from the end of McConnell's runway. You will recall amongst the hours of discussion we had on that topic, there was no discussion on this. It has been, we've had a working relationship with at least McConnell Air Force Base on how we are to handle the development of any type of wet surface. In that case, it was going to be a sand pit. And in my experience, those conditions for the development of these ponds deal with the creation of things that will retard the ability or the desire of these migratory birds, which is the specific concern here, from identifying this future body of water as an attractant. So what does that entail? It usually entails how the property owner would handle the vegetation around a pond, as well as the side slopes, and using such materials as riprap to prevent or at least discourage these birds from migrating to this particular pond. I tried before this meeting to get a clearer idea of what kind of that gray area meant for us specifically here today, because we're going to have a lot of questions. And as you can read in the email correspondence, it just seemed to hover around a hard no. There was a letter issued 10 years ago by the FAA that said, you know, in absence of the applicant agreeing to our conditions, we recommend that this application be denied. So what are those conditions? And that's not a foray into me discussing those. I don't know. My presumption in reading wildlife biology reports that are all tied to this FAA circular, one leads us back to the idea that you can design ponds with riprap and making sure that there are certain vegetation around the pond, not, specifically excluding such things as row crops and things of that nature that would attract birds to it. So the best I can tell, and we are more than willing to do those types of design considerations, I'm really not sure why the Wichita Airport Authority has a checklist for the development of ponds when the development of ponds results in their request for a denial on these types of applications. One of the points that I made 10 years ago, and I'll make again today, because it's still a question, at least in my mind, is having the opportunity to sit through plenty of these planning commission meetings as well as district advisory board meetings on a number of different development applications all across the county. I can't recall a time other than 10 years ago when the airport authority issued such type of guidance to development, whether that's a subdivision development, whether that's an industrial or commercial development, or whether it's a farmer wanting to dig a 30-acre farm pond. I'm not certain how many times this commission has denied such applications based on that advisory, but I can't recall one. So with that said, I would simply ask to consider this in the same favorable light that it was considered 10 years ago. Again, we will be willing to make certain concessions to the design of this pond to help mitigate in any fashion, any type of impact, work with Mr. Christopher to develop a plan, which is called for in the checklist, to help mitigate any potential attractant or the creation of an attractant on this particular body of water. We simply have not been, those attempts seemingly have been rebuffed. So I was hoping for an opportunity today to hear maybe a little bit more what that would entail. So I'll listen at the appropriate time for that information. On a secondary note, there was also some discussion as it centered to drainage plans and drainage, and I think the Planning Commission had a question about that as well. Again, this will have no impact on inflow or outflow. This is not a detention facility. This is not a retention facility. This has no drainage capacity as we would consider it for development. One of the unfortunate elements, perhaps, at least from my point of view, on these types of applications is we have to have an operational site plan and we have to have a redevelopment site plan. Oftentimes, people will look and pay more attention to the redevelopment site plan, showing potential lots. I'm not sure if there's 8 or a dozen of them, but in no fashion is this going to be a subdivision in the future. It's going to be a gentleman's farm pond and an agricultural production. So, as we try to explain to some of the county staff, a lot of these drainage reports and drainage easements are due at the time, we believe, at site development when we plat the property for a change of use. Nothing about this pond's going to alter, create any additional runoff, or anything of that nature. So again, besides being able to rip-wrap the outfall and inflow areas of the pond, there's really very little to do, very little to be concerned with, in our opinions, from a drainage standpoint. With that, I'll stand for any questions that you all may have.
Questions from the commission? Yes, Mr. Green.
Other than the passage of time, do we have any idea of what has changed out there that would warrant us to deny this request
Nothing.
since it was approved 10 years ago?
Nothing. No.
And then the second thing, if we were to approve this request, would you be in agreement with the 18 items that are listed in our packet? Would you be in agreement to comply with those?
By and large, I'll point you to condition 2 and condition 9. Condition 2, there again, I think we would like the ability to maybe clarify that. Again, and I, as well as the majority of the people in this room, know that I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. But in my reading of this FAA advisory circular, there is really no clear path as to what that means. Either I design a pond that has to be dry within 48 hours, I have to do a pond that is rectilinear with a concrete base as to avoid standing water, or I have to do nets with balls on them. I have to have noise-making material out there to blast sound at these birds if and so they choose to light here, or you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's really quite vague. And so I would like something to at least clarify, too, that we would be working with Mr. Christopher on developing a mitigation plan, if you will, which is called for deeper in the material. Be more than happy to do that. But I think just a black and white adoption of a pretty grade circular document would be a little bit, I don't think it serves anybody's purpose. And number 9 would run directly counter to some of the mitigation factors that I mentioned earlier by having steep banks rip-wrapped. So I don't think there's a lot of weight to number 9, but I just wanted to clarify that for the record. But But yes, to answer your question, those are, I believe, the same conditions that were ultimately approved 10 years ago, and we would abide by those just like we would have if we would have built this pond.
Richardson.
Mr. Avey, can we just take a 50,000-foot view here? The staff report says the water table is 25 to 40 feet. You're going to excavate to potentially to 20 feet. Where will the water come from for this? Is there a drainage area that drains into this and you're going to retain the water? Is the intent to have water here all the time?
My experience, at least around 55th Street and Ridge and all points south to the county line, is that the water table is actually high. It's probably not as high in this particular location as it is further south, but we have run into water tables that I would question that, and whether or not we've had, we've not done anything. If you recall on the one application that I mentioned at 55th and Clifton, there were test holes dug. We knew how deep groundwater was there. There's been no such site investigation other than soil borings to acknowledge the fact that there is fill material there to be had. So we don't know that, but no, it's not going to, it's just going to be a farm pit. So it carries no detention quality. It may store more water, but that's not a detention of stormwater. That's just an open pond. So it's going to inflow from about, Scott Lindeback, I believe, did some calculations, less than 200 acres, maybe about 150 acres of drainage basin that would flow through a pipe directly north. Let me see if I can find an aerial. It's hard to see, but there is a pipe running from this location underneath 55th Street that drains through the property, then out the property. And that would be maintained. Again, it would be riprap to provide any type. We're not going to accelerate the water in any fashion, different than any other pond situation.
But you intend to store water in this excavation?
It will be a farm pond, yes. It will be a pond just like any other farm pond in Sedgwick County.
And by storing water, then you'll have some sort of an outfall, I assume. But
Different than a retaining
but
pond,
we don't-
however.
But what you're telling me is you don't know what the groundwater level is?
I'm saying that that's not, at least from our standpoint going into it, Mr. Richardson, has not been one of the primary variables that we've looked at. We don't, from a stormwater drainage plan standpoint, our engineers have not required that, requested that, have shown that any need for that information at this point.
But everybody's assuming, including the airport, that's going to hold water, and that's your intent for it to hold water in
Correct.
some fashion.
Correct.
The next question I have is about the circular that's in question, and it's AC 150/5200-33B. And the airport says don't approve this unless you agree to abide by it, and you're saying to us you don't know what it says.
I do know what it says. I know that it doesn't give anything definitive.
Okay, my next question then is, and this may be a question for staff, who enforces the compliance with this circular? So let's just say it's approved with the condition that you comply with this.
Sure.
Who enforces that? Who decides what you have to do? What I'm hearing you say is you really don't know what you have to do.
And I've read it all.
And you've read it all.
Yes.
And we don't have it, so
So,
fortunately we haven't had to read it. But my question is, it kind of seems to hinge on what are you going to do to mitigate potential for birds? And we don't have a checklist.
We do have a checklist.
But you're saying that doesn't necessarily make sense to do the things that they want to do in this circular.
Sure. If I may just give you an overview of how I know it and then let staff either corroborate that or not. So the FAA sends these circulars to managers of these various airports that are noted very well in local and federal code. They discern different areas for different types of treatment, and there's maybe a half a dozen of those types of designations. There's 4 different mapped areas that we know about. But when you, so the FAA sends this advisory circular to managers of airports. In this case, it fell on Brad Christopher' desk. He notes that when any pond or water surface or any other type of wildlife attractant is proposed within this maybe 25% of the county, if you look at the map, then they're opposed to it. Why? Because
and
the
I see
FAA
that.
ties their funding to the viability of airports, and part of this is to manage the safety and well-being of that airport, which there is not a person here that doesn't want that to occur. But tell me what a hazard is. Tell me what a danger is that's different than any other development that's happened, from the Wichita Zoo to the new park up by the old landfill to 5 or 6 subdivisions that we've built within the last 8 months. I don't know.
And I see the checklist here, but the checklist says, can any or all of it be taken care of? I mean, it seems to be a little bit soft in how you do this. Is there a way to come to some agreement between the landowner and the airport as to what would be done? And if so, who enforces that agreement?
So one enforcement body is the county, is you all and the county commission. You have the ability to deny this application straight up, and therefore, implement this circular, so to
I'm
speak.
talking about an ongoing basis to see that
Absolutely.
it gets done as we would, and that would be MAPC.
If it's approved as a conditional use, then it would be zoning enforcement would enforce it just like they would any other conditional use.
And the airport would have the ability to go out and inspect it and say, this is not meeting what we agreed to do?
Well, what I'd like to see, is there anybody from the airport here to speak
Okay.
directly to
All right.
this and see if they could help? If they can't, then
All right.
I don't.
And to be perfectly honest, I can give you a quick rundown of the checklist. Does this land use include any potential wildlife attractants? If yes, then you go to the second one. Can it be eliminated or avoided? If no, then can it be reduced?
Yeah, I see the,
Yeah.
I've read the checklist.
All right, then you
but
go down here and it's just like,
somebody has
please
to
don't
make
feed
it-
the
yeah.
geese signs.
Somebody has to make a decision about these things, and that's got to be an enforcement capacity of somebody who says, can we get together?
Mr. Avey asked, what's the hazard? Well, from the airport's perspective, water bodies are the hazard. Now, whether there's, 300 or 500 of these already in existence, that's a different deal, but anything that attracts wildlife is perceived as being a hazard. And so what these guidelines are intended to do is to try and minimize that. And my understanding, since there's nobody here from the airport, so I could be completely wrong, but I'm just telling you what my understanding is they then use this checklist, and if there's going to be water there and it's going to last longer than 48 hours, can you do things like plant grass that's going to be 6 foot tall along the banks to discourage geese from being there? If you can't plant grass, can you put riprap or something else that discourages them? If you can't do that, then my understanding is around McConnell, they've actually hired someone with bird dogs to go out there on a regular basis and let the dogs run around and harass birds so that they don't feel safe, and keep them away. Those kinds of things are the mitigation thing. What would have been helpful is if we could have had some sort of an understanding from the applicant and the airport folks on what's possible and what's not possible. So I would assume that should you decide to approve this, one of the conditions could be that the applicant and the airport folks get together and come up with a workable plan, and either they reach agreement on it and it moves ahead, or they don't and it has to come back, or some sort of action like
That was
that.
my, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, I just comment on what you were saying at McConnell. there's at least one landowner out there that won't let the bird dogs on there, and that's a problem. McConnell's also employed ravens out there to keep birds off the end of the runway.
Mr. Johnson.
Hey, this is a question of staff. Basically, I know of a large pond that was dug on, it would have been on Ridge Road between 47th and MacArthur. Was the same type of requirements were on that? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I would have thought it was more so in the flight path.
For your reference, it is in the same green designated mapped area as we are, Area D. And I think, I think you have that correspondence in your packet. I mean, that was something that I reached out several weeks ago to get at least a clearer understanding of these types of regulations. And again, I think you saw the response.
Mr. Daly.
The Area D you talk about, where in mileage does that begin from the airport?
In brief terms, in 2012, there was a study done to help kind of solidify, at least give a little bit better idea of what type of implementation strategy locally we could adopt that would provide clearer guidance. This checklist that we keep talking about is one of those items that came out of it. That section 28- or .08 is the other implementation strategy. And in there, they designate different areas of the airport so that if there's 6 or 8 runways associated with Eisenhower Airport, each one is assigned or categorized into importance. Utilitarian airstrips, and then the primary precision instrument runways that require greater separation distances, mainly from a height standpoint, but again, from attractorants. So it is a haphazard map. I assume it was generated in GIS to where you could go a quarter mile on either side of the center line of the runway is extended south 50,000 feet, I believe. So you will see this kind of wedge shape type of demarcation as this Area D. So everything between more or less 119th Street and the east side of the county is contained within this green. It goes north of approximately to 53rd Street north, and it goes, I don't know how far south here, but we're clearly well within the southern area of it. So I do have that map if you want me to circulate that. I only have the
Well,
one.
just tell us the mileage that your particular project is away from the,
End of the runway.
that dividing line where Area D was.
Sure, we're approximately,
Starts.
from the airport, from the critical zone, we are approximately 10,850 feet south of that. So we are 850 feet approximately south of the more restrictive zone as it relates to this circular. We are in this catch-all green area that you will see. And again, you'll see the magnitude of this green designation. And we're just, again, curious, nobody wants these things to be arbitrary in their application. So we'll do what everybody else was required to do to avoid a denial of their application. And I don't think that's happened. So again, we would be more than willing to be the origin of that system. We'd be more than happy to work with Brad or his designee, or if you feel more appropriate, since quite frankly you'd be asking us to cooperate and ask permission to get a plan put together of the people that are opposing this application, perhaps the planning department's a better clearinghouse for that plan. Again, we're open. We're open for suggestions and have been.
Well, I don't know how many of you remember, it's been, what, Dale, how many years ago when they tried to put the zone, just like they did up at McConnell Air Force Base, except that's a noise zone. They tried to do the same thing at the airport. It was denied by this body, also by the city and the county. They all denied that application. And so this is kind of a result of that not passing, is that particular thing, I believe. Second thing is that we could sit here and talk for another hour about whether we, this or that. And I would suggest that we, if they're willing to get with the airport authority and with the planning department to come up with a set of guidelines, I'd like to say, let's defer it until they get that done. Because I can't make a decision one way or the other. That's all I'm trying to say, because we can sit here and discuss for another.
Just to comment that and I agree with what he says, and I would deny it otherwise. If we have to take a vote to do something, I would go denial, because there isn't enough information to make a decision.
Mr. Johnson?
Is the airport advised of this?
Yes.
I advised them right the day after I filed the application.
I mean, if the airport don't want to talk about it, then we never will approve it, because it's best for them not to say something if they don't want it. I guess from a legal standpoint, I'm curious if this thing's going to run out and we defer it, does a time stop where they still got the right to use it, or does it?
As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, isn't this is soon to expire, but they're applying, okay, November, and then is this being couched as an extension or an actual new conditional use?
Filed as an extension.
To go to the podium.
Got to go to the podium.
Taking it as a new request, but it was essentially a request to renew the previous approval.
To answer your question, Commissioner Johnson, I don't think it would really make a difference then. I mean, it'd be a new 10-year. I think they're making the request for 10 years on this one as well, if I remember correctly. So I think it would just,
Okay.
I mean, maybe for a brief period of time, they wouldn't be able to go do it, but they'd still, if it got approved later, they'd be able to initiate it.
Okay.
And for that matter, we would have the ability to do two other things other than this conditional use. One is to dig the pond, stockpile the material off-site under the terms of this existing conditional use. The second would be to dig a farm pond the exact same size, the exact same shape. As long as we don't haul any material off that site, there's nothing that can be done to prevent that. So again, we need to take the 50,000-foot view from multiple angles, I think. And again, to Commissioner Daley, we should have every piece of information, more or less, that we had 10 years ago to make that recommendation for approvals. And again, nothing fundamental. We're not changing the shape or the scope of the project, simply the time frame. And so I think we have two records to fall back on when it comes to the amount of information. And the only other thing that I would say about that is that, again, it's not the applicant's desire to preclude any type of discussion with the airport authority, and I think we've shown, again, multiple attempts to try to get clarity to some of these questions.
I have Mr. McKay, just a second. I have Mr. McKay, you had a question?
I was just gonna make
You
a
had another
motion.
question? Okay, just a
Is there
second.
anybody-
Mr. Foster?
Russ, if you provide some clarification on this diagram we've received. Says airport hazard zones, it says no permit required if. And for area D, it refers 300 feet or less, and for area A, it's 25 feet or less. 300 feet or less of what?
Exactly. That regulation that map comes from, that I'm assuming is the same, I'm not assuming this, it's coming from the same section of code that Mr. Christopher was emailing staff and I as to the basis of their recommendation for denial or their opposition to the case. We aren't building anything of any type of height. Again, this is the prevention of the attractant of wildlife, whether it's deer running across the main run strip or you have flocks of Canadian geese, which is the primary concern locally. The regulations I felt like I was given, although it does have that one out of 28 pages, it has one sentence that says wildlife attractants. It primarily deals with the type and height of land uses within these zones. It's primarily a guide, as the airport hazard map has historically been, providing glide paths. If I am building a hotel at Ridge and Maple, I have to use these types of glide slope maps to determine whether I can build a 5-story hotel or a 4-story hotel. And that all goes through, conveniently, FAA webpage, and they'll give you lat and long for what height limits are. We're not dealing with height limits. We're dealing simply with the potential, different from all the other water surfaces within this green area, to attract wildlife to this location.
Green.
Yeah, I was going to make a motion, but I think that
We got other people we need to
there are
hear,
other
I
people that
think.
want to
Yeah,
ask
I-
questions.
Mr. Daly?
I would like to reply to your 10-year statement. What was done 10 years ago, things change, and they'll change in the next 10 years. So just because it was approved 10 years ago, then, and this is not a question, so this is a reply to your statement, that it doesn't mean that it should continue. So that's all I wanted to say.
Mr. Warren?
Before a motion comes in, we've not yet heard from the audience, so I don't know if there's anybody in the audience
Yeah,
that wants to
I
speak, to this issue, but my thoughts and concerns, as I've been listening to the conversation and what's going on, and then looking at Google Maps, there's already a number of ponds, not quite as large as this one, but there's a number of ponds in the area. I'm concerned that the airport authority is not here. If it was, my thinking would be is if they were really concerned or thought that it was a major problem, they would have somebody here at this meeting. Not unusual for them to just give a blanket no, anything that potentially could add birds, but that could be sunflower seeds, out there that could do that. So, I'm a little bit concerned about just the blanket idea that we're just not going to allow it, we're not going to go for it, is being an issue, and then not giving some decent guidelines. If there was something that they had a very specific concern about, then they more than just kind of laying off on blanket regulations and without any specifics of what they need to do, makes it a concern. So. But I'll be curious if there's anybody in the audience that wants to speak with this issue before we make a decision.
Mr. Richardson?
Got a question for the counselor here about Mr. Avy's statement that if they were not to haul this off, making it construction material someplace else, they could essentially build any kind of pond they wanted to without anybody's approval. Is that a correct statement?
I think it is in the unincorporated area, as long as you're not mining. And I'm trying to recall the exact definition of mining, and Dale might give me a little assistance here, but I don't know that just digging a pond is anything that would require approval for, and you're not hauling the dirt or anything off of the property. So I think what Russ said is, what Mr. Avey said is correct, but.
I could have a property at the end of the runway, and if I chose to, I could.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me couch my statement. I'm sorry. I think you may run into some federal regulations and requirements that apply. I don't think anyone on this matter has indicated that any of those would prevent what's proposed here. But yes, if you're by the end of the runway, you might run into some hiccups with federal regulations.
But in this zone, you could build a farm pond of any size without approval.
My understanding is in the building code, or one of the codes that MAPCD operates, that if you move X number of cubic yards of soil around, you have to get some sort of a permit. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what the threshold is, but you may have to get drainage review and approval as part of some sort of permit, but you don't need zoning approval if you're not taking the dirt off site.
You would not need airport approval either unless it's in one of these other zones.
Well, the only thing I wonder about is there is a general clause in the airport hazard overlay district that talks about, in addition to building height, that says that, or any other activities that pose a threat to aircraft operations, so to speak. I don't know that we've ever had that come up in relation to a pond, but there is kind of this blanket statement in that ordinance.
further questions from the commission? Dave, did you have something that,
Well, I was only going to follow up on Mr. Richardson's question in that once a pond being built, depending upon its size and also the drainage area in that, you could require, it could require a permit from the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources. But as I recall the threshold, it has to have a drainage area like a half square mile in area, and I don't think this is large enough to qualify for that. But that's at the state level, and I don't know how much they would bring all these other rules into play.
do we have anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Bring it back for rebuttal.
No rebuttal.
All right, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Ma'am,
Yes, sir.
I think when we're going to the farm pond thing, they own more than the piece of ground we're talking about. So when you go to the state resource, it's the overall property owned, not just the piece of property we're talking about. So if they own a quarter section of ground or a half section of ground, that's so, I kind of agree with Russ, that could happen because, you know, applicant, airport authority, planning department, and go over the rules that were set down. Through 18 and have a common agreement.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. McKay, a second by Mr. Daly. Discussion? Mr. Green.
I'd like to propose a substitute motion to approve the request and have with regards to item 2, have the applicant and the airport authority work together to work out an agreement to mitigate the advisory circular concerns that are addressed and that are unclearly addressed, I guess I should say, in that item 2 of the approval, if we should decide to approve this.
Can I have a second?
I have second by Mr. Blick. Motion by Mr. Green, second by Mr. Blick. Discussion? Mr. Warren.
Just my leaning on the, I don't know if everybody got to see this, this went around the room there. If I'm looking at this right, then this is in the green zone, which it has nothing to do with ponds, but it's, you would not have to have a permit is if you were building something less than 300 foot tall. That's a fairly tall structure that was coming in. In terms of notification to the airport, you would not have to have a permit if you're under 300 foot tall. So this is getting outside, fairly far outside of the range of where the traffic patterns are running. So I'm inclined, that's one reason why I will support the substitute motion.
Mr. Richardson.
Mr. Green, in your motion, what happens if they don't arrive at an agreement? Is this subject to that agreement?
The approval would be subject to the agreement that they come to.
Bring it back.
And if not, it comes back here?
Right.
Wouldn't that be the same thing as what John moved, that they'd have to get together and agree on all of them instead of just number 2?
I think what Mr. Green's saying is if they can agree with the staff, the airport authority, and the applicant, then it moves on and we don't have to hear it again.
Right.
If they can't get together, then it comes back, which is kind of what Mr. McKay's saying.
Mr. Foster.
I know from what I'm looking at here, I would really like to see what information comes out of that meeting, just so we can learn from that in the future. So I want to see this back here so that we can all learn from this going forward. And I think I'm going to support the original motion.
Yes,
Yeah, I agree.
you agree. Mr. Johnson.
I think Russ had indicated they were in agreement with everything but number 2. Well, if that motion is to get that lined out, You can always have a report coming back what was decided, so we learn something rather than hear the case again.
Other discussion on the motion number 2? Okay, so all in favor of motion made by the substitute motion, sorry, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, so,
hands.
yeah, we need a show of hands.
Favor?
Ayes in favor.
Ayes in favor.
Which motion?
Motion, the
Substitute.
substitute motion.
6.
7.
And got 'em all. Those opposed?
7-4.
Okay, motion carries 7-4. And then what do we do with the substitute? What do we do with the first motion? Okay, we're done. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda.
My bad.
Okay, item number 6, ZON 2018-00034, county zone change from rural residential to general office. And we have Dave Year out to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a request to rezone property at the corner of 101st Street North and North Oliver from rural residential to GO General Office. If you'll recall, recently, this area was included within a plat. The plat covered approximately 15 acres that was, went all the way over to their west property line at this location. Created 3 lots. The only lot at the corner of 101st and Oliver is what's the subject of this rezoning request. Rezoning is to go to general office. The applicants indicated that would be to allow for the development of an office on this property. As noted in the zoning regulations, if the zoning is granted and for the general office use, it's restricted to essentially office uses, a handful of other uses that would otherwise be permitted, many of them in the rural residential district as well, such as residential uses, churches and things of that nature. It would not allow the outdoor storage of equipment. The applicant is in the, has an excavation contractor's operation, so outdoor storage of construction equipment material is not permitted in the GO zone. Also, the screening requirements, the zoning code, when it develops, will come into play, and it will require that appropriate screening and buffering be constructed on the north and on the west property line of this lot. We included in the application the preliminary sketch showing the anticipation of what the applicant is envisioning as they might build on the property. This is an aerial that shows where we're located at the corner. It's just agricultural land. This identifies its location in reference to that part of the county. This is the site plan that was provided by the applicant. It's conceptual. It's not tied to or is made as a condition of this zoning case, but it does show how they intend to construct a small office building, 2 access points off of Oliver, one on 101st, which is consistent with the plat that this board approved and is going forward. An aerial looking at the site. This is just farm ground at this location. Presently, that's looking north on Oliver. This is looking east along 101st Street. This is looking south on Oliver. This is southeast, and you can see the only home that's really in the immediate area is shown at that location. That's the summary of what this request is about. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Not if agent or applicant could step forward, provide your name and address, and you have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Chris Spohm from Garver, 8535 East 21st Street North in Wichita. And I'm here on behalf of the Barnharts, the applicant for this property. When they approached us about building an office at this location, we considered LC zoning to begin with, but then in discussions with the planning department and knowing that there was really not any desire by the area that there would be equipment parked on this site, we went to the GO office. That site plan of the office is the one currently being developed by the owners. Give me 1 second. And that's consistent with the subdivision plat that has been submitted and is underway at this site. Fairly straightforward, an office building with a surface parking lot. That's the desire here. That's why the GO is appropriate for this location. And with that, I'd stand for any questions that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody from the audience who would like to speak on this case? Okay, if you'll step forward and state your name and address, whoever wants to go first. You still have to go to the podium, please. No, you still have to go to the podium and state your name and address, please, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I am Betty Taylor. I live at 10460 North Oliver. We are just east and north of this property. And my husband would have been here today, but he's sick. But I do have one question before I make my other comments. We were at the meeting, the zoning meeting, and I didn't understand that there were going to be 2 access on Oliver. I thought there was 1 on Oliver and 2 on 101st. Is that correct? Or?
Let Dave answer that question.
The plat that was approved identified, and the County Public Works apparently concurred that they allowed 2 access points onto North Oliver and 1 on 101st Street on this lot.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I was mistaken. I thought it was 2 on 101st and 1 on Oliver. Okay, well, Tom and my concerns is in general office, it allows for asphalt and concrete plants to be built on the land. And this does also say that after the job is completed, they have to be down in 30 days. But his business is construction, Mr. Barnhart's, and so I'm concerned that there could be several several of those asphalt and construction put up within a year. And he could also have some government jobs which do not require it to be taken down. And our rural resident area does not need the noise or the dirt associated with the plant. And Mr. Barnhart may say that he isn't going to use the concrete or asphalt now, but having been in business for 40-plus years, things change, and you have to change with them. And I did hear that he was thinking about concrete. And at the last meeting, Mr. Barnhart mentioned to us that he wanted to get the business away from his house, but because of the noise and the dirt, but we don't care to have it at our home either. And that's all.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to speak from the audience? If you'll step forward and also share your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Penny Clement. My husband and I own the property at 10500 North Oliver. We don't live there yet, so I can provide our actual current address where we live. It's at 937 Cedarwood Court, and that's in Andover. We purchased that lot. It's 30 acres. It's on the east side of Oliver and very slightly north of where this proposed changes are. We purchased that 30 acres with the intention of building that dream home to retire to. This has nothing to do with that. Dave and I have talked long and hard about whether to oppose this, but we do. We oppose it for several reasons. First of all, the environment out there is strictly rural, agricultural. There's nothing about the environment there that goes with the general office zoning, which is in direct contrast to what's listed in this proposal. It says that it's in keeping with it's not out of character with the neighborhood. We disagree with that. The smallest lot that I am aware of in that area currently with a home on it is 10 acres. So granted, this lot is smaller, but to also change it to general office is a huge change. This proposal shows 30 parking spaces. That doesn't strike me as a nice, quiet office that you would normally have in your home. That's a lot of parking, a lot of noise. What Betty pointed out as far as dust and noise, again, this is a rural residential area. In the photos that you saw, there are really no homes directly across the road, but the homes that are there are very, very close, as would ours be if we wind up building out there now. If you look at what general office allows in its to be built, included in general office is an assisted living, a group home, a group residence, a hospital, a nursing facility, a school, a bed and breakfast inn, a broadcast or recording studio, a funeral home, a hotel or motel. Those are all included in general office. And so what you're doing is you're changing an agricultural area to zoning that would include all of those things. So we ask that you deny this request. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody on the commission have any questions from them? Pam, can you go back to the podium?
Just for staff, no.
Just staff. Okay, I'm sorry. Do you have a question for staff?
Well, I think it would be good to clarify whether or not these use characterizations are correct about asphalt, et cetera. Can we have some clarification on that, Dave, or?
Right now, in all zoning districts, what's called asphalt concrete plant limited is permitted by right. Those are essentially temporary placement of facilities that are tied to actual government construction projects, not just general contract projects. The type of more of a permanent placement where someone would have an asphalt or concrete plant is a general, and that's not permitted in GO or RR. Some of the other uses also would probably trigger a requirement for a lot more type of an advanced kind of a sewage system or public sewers, which are not available at this location.
What about the hotel motel? It's allowed in office? Okay.
Okay.
My name's Jeff Hudson. I live at 9949 North Oliver. I'm just south of where they're wanting to put this place in. And a lot of that land, I've been out there for almost 30 years, a little under 30 years. And I moved out there, my wife and I, she's passed away now, but we moved out there to get away from all this, the city stuff. And we like the rural areas. And most of these people that live out there did the same thing. We want to get away from the city. And I know this, they're talking about an office building now, but like you say, later down the road, they could come back and throw in some of this other stuff. And most of this stuff has been farmland for years. And most of these houses out here, they have for lagoons for our wastewater. And are you going to tell me this building here is going to have a gigantic lagoon put out there for his wastewater, or how's that going to work? And what's it going to do to our underground water system? A lot of people run their houses on wells. And if they some later years down the road, they did decide to put, I noticed at the very bottom of the thing, he is in construction, and they left it at the very bottom of the list that he could put in an asphalt company years down the road if he decided to change his mind or something of that nature. But what would that do to our underground water system and our water supplies? And my neighbor that has the cows to the north of me there, he depends off the drainage off this field that he's wanting to put his office in, that and a lot of them fields around there drains down into his ponds that feeds his water, feeds his cattle. And I'm worried of what kind of damage that could do to his area, and not just his, but all of ours. And that's my main concern. I'm against the whole thing myself. And like I say, I've been there for almost 30 years, and I'd hate to have to put my house up for sale, seeing our neighborhood turning into a commercial system. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Thank you. Anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Yes, ma'am. It's okay. If you can just go to the podium and provide your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Betty Rhodes, and I'm a trustee of a family trust that owns the 80 acres minus 5 acres that is directly east of Oliver, and that corner of Oliver and 101st Street North. I actually live in Mulvane at 919 North First. Now, we bought the property there in 1964 and enjoyed the rural environment and so on. Our kids were in 4-H. They grew up country-wise. My husband was from the farm. I was not. We put in a pond that's in the pasture there. We have the pasture rented out, and the cropland at the corner is being farmed by people in the neighborhood. So not only are we benefiting from our property, but so are farmers in the area. I drove through on Oliver from Keachai not too long ago, and half a mile probably north of 61st Street is where the commercial properties end. From that next 4.5 miles up to 101st Street, it's all residential farm property, croplands. Some are new homes on smaller lots, people that have moved from the city to be out in the country, to retire, raise their kids, have a few animals, horses, or whatever. It seems to me that if we break this avenue of Oliver North to put in commercial property, that we're just asking for that to be a pathway for people. Oh, well, there's something here, business at 101st Street in Oliver, then people building from Keachai on north. And that is not why people live in that area. And number one, we're reducing agricultural land by putting other things in. So we're reducing the income of people that have farmed that land for years and years, second and third generation. And I'm just not sure that I would be ready to give up my land for a commercial property. So these things need to be considered before we just say, oh, it's okay for this person to go in with a business. But is it okay? It's totally foreign to the environment of that area. And so I would like to protest for that reason. It needs to be at this point in time, maybe 10 years down the road, that'll be different. But at this point in time, it is still rural, suburban homes and agricultural land.
Ma'am, your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
No,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Any
listening.
questions from the commission? Hey, is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on? No, ma'am. I'm sorry that you can't. I apologize. No.
Nancy Whitaker, 10655 North Oliver. Our property abuts the north end of this development that he wants to do. I just had a question. My husband wanted me to find out if this size facility would just require a single meter, or when you have this kind of property, does it require a hydrant? And has he secured any water yet for that place, or is he drilling his own well? We were just wanting to know that.
From my understanding, when the plat was approved, that he intends to obtain rural water service. And so he would need to get his meter through the rural water district, and whatever they require is what he'd be required to do.
I just wondered if he would require more than just a regular meter, because there is not enough pressure, I know that, because of other applications, to put more than just a regular meter in at that area. And I didn't know on a facility, a commercial facility, if it required more.
For an office use, I would assume bathrooms and sinks would be the main thing that would be there, because technically under the zoning code, this is not a request for commercial activity. This is an office use, which is a middle range between residential and commercial, or whatever that's worth.
Okay, thank you.
Questions from the commission? Okay. Next presenter or speaker?
My name is George Elder. I live just down west, about a half mile on 101. We own Eldersley, which is a commercial endeavor in the county there. We're actually part of Keachai. Our county...
Can you state your address, please?
Yes, 3501 East 101 Street North.
Thank you.
Our county and a lot of conversations I've been a part of in the city are trying to understand the desirability of our community on a national scale. I think desirability and land use are a huge part of this conversation. Zoning is about suitability and utility, but it is also about desirability. And I think that while I share some of the concerns that have been voiced, I don't share all of them. I believe in commercial activity and am part of it in the region right there. But I do share a concern about the 3 lots, as far as this is the first office building, but 3 lots right there along 101 being developed present a commercial presence that's expanding in a very residential neighborhood. I won't present a protest to this. I couldn't say that I'm clearly opposed to it, but I am concerned that this may not be a cohesive land use to the area, and therefore I would, at this point, just manifest that I'm a concerned community member, and that this, especially for the future, having 3 commercial lots along the corridor there is of concern to me. So that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the commission? Yes, Mr.
Sure.
Bailey.
You said you had a commercial business in that area. What is that business?
We're in the city of Keachai, but we operate a blackberry farm, a goat dairy and creamery where we sell cheese. We operate a small restaurant there, and we operate a small wood shop that does furniture and a small artisan sawmill that does wood products.
Probably have more traffic coming in and out than this one.
Which is why I would manifest concern but not protest.
Green.
Yes, Mr. Alder, I just wanted to clarify something for you.
Certainly.
It looks like it's going to be a two-lot plat, and the one lot is being identified for general office, and the other lot is going to maintain its rural residential status. So if they were going to come back and try to make this lot 2 general office or change the zoning on this lot, it would come back before this body.
Thank you.
I think that's a 3-lot plat, just for clarity.
Okay, because this drawing shows a 2-lot plat.
Yeah, flip it over on the back and the
Okay.
plaques on
Any
the
other
other
questions
side.
from the commission? Thank you. Is there anybody
To-
else in the audience that would like to speak on this case? Sir.
David Clement, and I bought the lot my wife spoke of earlier at 10500 North Oliver. Just had a quick follow-up on that. One thing that wasn't touched on was the conditional issues. And my concern with that is, under the conditional issues, there's commercial uses, which there are really not anything in there that we want around residential. I mean, a bank, heliport, personal care service, warehouse, self-service storage. I mean, these are all things that could get approved and if he happens to sell and moves on. Also in the industrial, manufacturing section, mining, quarrying, oil and gas drilling, rock crushing, and solid waste incinerators. I mean, it's my understanding all these would be possible if conditional uses were approved. And one additional, I was here for the plot plan meeting, and the new drawings do not match what they had up on the original one. There was 2 entrances on 101st and one on Oliver, so that's also changed. That's all I have.
Are there any questions from the commission? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to present on this case?
I'm Joe Jean Matthews, and I live at 4444 East 101st Street. This is my house right here.
Ma'am, you'll have to use the mouse and step back to the podium because, ma'am, you'll have to step back to the podium because we're recording and we need to.
This is my house over there, right next to his property, and my pond in between it. Unlike the Clemens I've already built, this was my retirement home. This was my whole investment, and now I've got commercial property moving into me. I'm really concerned about this because I did move out there for my peace and quiet, and now they're putting a commercial property in. It was my understanding that when he bought that 80 acres, that he said it was going to remain all agricultural. And so what do we people have to rely on when somebody tells us something then turns around and changes what they're doing with that property? He does have a property and a business farther east of us, and he has his construction stuff down there. And I'm wondering why he can't keep it down there. Is it bothering his personal space there at his home? And that's why he's moving in it and want to bother everybody else. But it is residential. If I knew there was going to be commercial development there in that area, I would have never moved out there. It's peaceful. All the neighbors get together, and we're nice to one another. And I can't say this for sure, but I heard a statement one time that somebody asked him about why he was doing this, and he said, well, if you don't want that, you should outbid me, which doesn't sound like, to me, like a very nice person to work with. I'm just a common person that spent my money for a retirement place, for my peace and quiet, and now somebody's wanting to build commercial out there. I'm concerned about, since he said he was going to use it for agricultural, and now he's changed that, how much more he's going to change down the road. I'm concerned about my pond. I'm concerned about Dale Hess's ponds across the street that we use all the water from. I'm concerned about noise and any pollutants if later on he changes his mind and he wants to put all his equipment out there. So I'm strictly opposed to it. You know what I'm saying? Based on the information that he has provided us in the past about what he planned to do with that land and what has transpired and the possibilities of the problems in the future. Like I said, we moved out there to the rural community, and that's not what we're getting now.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Thank you, ma'am. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? If not, we'll ask the agent or applicant to come back for 2-minute rebuttal.
Thank you again, Chris Bohm with Garver. I'll just answer a few of the questions as I can. Any of the more intensive uses that were listed for a site in GO or conditional uses, so they have to come back to this body if they are to be implemented. And the idea here is it's GO, General Office. In regard to any development to the west, it remains rural residential. The other two lots are rural residential. The intent there was just to control the right-of-way right now and get 2 access points, additional access points on 101st, just have a cohesive plat that's just part of one ownership. Other uses like hotels or bed and breakfasts, maybe not a bed and breakfast, but anything more intensive than something that had a few bedrooms in it, you don't have the capability for on-site sanitary sewer, and you wouldn't have the capability for water, domestic water, from the rural water district. An office is a low use of water, a few bathrooms, a few sinks, and that's it. So it's very well suited for this site from the standpoint of the infrastructure that's there. It has the suitability for an advanced sewer system to handle the low flows from an office. It has rural water availability. It has 2 paved highway-type county roads right at that intersection. I may also make note of the idea that back in the day, I mean, literally decades ago, many of the major intersections across the county were zoned with quadrant LC zoning, just to prepare for the advancement of the development. And in that case, you know, this could be even a more intensive use. The GO is so restrictive that you could very easily have a farming use at that corner that would be far more distracting and detriment to the community, you know, an intensive agricultural use. So it's allowed in RR. That's just part of the zoning for rural residential. So it's a low impact use. It's a planned area. It has parking. It's for GO office.
Time
Thank
is
you.
up.
Thank you. Please, I ask for your approval. Thank you.
Is there any questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson?
Chris,
Sir, can you stay up there? Thank you.
Chris, would you be open to some sort of protective overlay to eliminate some of these uses that you don't intend to have?
Yes.
Did that come up at all with maybe a staff question as well? But
Yeah, we have not had that discussion, but if you desired that some of the more intensive uses were eliminated, I would have to speak to Mr. Barnhart, but that would be something, if you made it conditional upon the agreement, I would speak to him.
I guess I'd have to ask the staff whether or not you could even do that at this point, if it's not part of the case.
Well, certainly you could recommend that as, if you decide to approve it, as a condition of approval, and we'd outline those uses, and assuming that the Plan Commission left the motion open-ended to move ahead, or if you wanted it to come back
So could we leave it open-ended that work it out with the staff as to
The
the
things,
protective overlay or not?
I guess what I would point out is, and it's up to you all, but in the RR Rural Residential District now, all of those uses, asphalt, concrete plant in general, landfill, mining, quarrying, oil and gas, rock crushing, those are the same situation as they are in general office. It all takes conditional use approval. So that was why staff didn't recommend a protective overlay, is because it's kind of a wash.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Foster?
Chris, I'm trying to recall at the subdivision committee meeting when we were looking at the plat, Mr. Barnhart did a good job of explaining why he was doing this. And what I'm trying to remember is the conversation that, you know, the understanding is his equipment was not going to be on this site. And I'm trying to follow the logic on that. Maybe you can fill in the gap of, you go to the effort of developing office space and, you know, getting it away from the house, so to speak. Well, I would think it'd be the other way around. You don't want to get the equipment away from your house versus the office aspect of this. Can you kind of fill that in, please?
In my discussions with Mr. Barnhart, and I was not at that subdivision committee meeting, so I can't speak to what he said at that time, much of his work is remote, I mean, out of the state. He does construction operations in kind of the southern United States. So his desire was to have an office away from his home where he did office things. He did his contracts and he did all the other administrative functions that he needs to do to run his construction company. So that was his desire.
Thank you.
Mr. Warren?
I had a staff question. I was looking through, this fall outside of everybody's sphere of influence, doesn't fall under Park City or Keachai? Is it outside?
It's outside of everybody's food.
Outside of it?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Mr. Daly?
So just to expand on David's question about the house, now, his office now is actually inside of his residence?
I believe that is correct, and I believe there's a conditional use on that property to allow that, if my memory serves. There is not. Okay.
Home occupation or something like that. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense, that he gets his office away from interruptions from what happens in your family to get something professional.
Any other questions of the agent? Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll bring it back to the commission for action. Johnson?
Now, I want to, since Dale pointed out, rural residential has some of them same things that could be approved on a conditional use as well as this zoning. I'm going to move to approve per staff comments.
Second.
I have motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. Mr. Foster, you have a question?
It's a staff question. You know, Mr. Richardson brought it up and Dale answered the question about conditional uses. When staff looked at it, are there any items in there that it would make sense at this point in time to just not allow? Go ahead and put the protective overlay and, you know, like the asphalt or something like that. Just avoid the headache of coming back.
I guess what we were assuming is because of the limited services available, any of the more intense uses like a hotel, motel wouldn't be able to be put there because there just isn't the facilities to make it work. But if the commission feels more secure in actually putting a list of uses that are prohibited, then that's certainly within your purview.
Other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 10-0. Okay, moving on to item number 8. Case number ZON 2018-0038, city zone change from TF3 to MF29.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Kathy Morgan for the Planning Department. This is a request for a zone change. You can see the zoning map on the screen. This is just 1 block south of the WSU campus. What you're seeing on the zoning map is the brown is B multifamily. The yellow is TF3. What is currently located on this property is an educational building that belonged to the Congregational Church directly west of this corner. And this has now been resold, and so the applicant is requesting the change to MF 29 so that they can repurpose the existing building and construct 2 new apartment buildings on this site. Again, here you can see parking and multi-tenant uses just south of 17th Street on the aerial. This is indicated for new residential according to the comprehensive plan. I've included a site plan for your in your packet. North is at the top, so the parking would come in off 16th Street and go down and exit an existing drive on the south side of the property. This is the education building. It will be repurposed for apartments. This is a parking area right now. That's where the new buildings, the 2 new buildings will be constructed. This is looking back southwest at the education, the existing building, and then the parking area as it exists now. This is that existing drive that would continue through the redevelopment, and then and here's this other lot in this area is what this is, right on the left side of your picture. This is looking north. This is you see an existing parking apartment building right there on the corner. The church is to the west. Oops, sorry. There you have a better look at the church. So staff is recommending that the application be approved as it is. It does meet the comprehensive plan or the for this area, and it would allow additional residential for WSU. And I'll answer any questions.
Click.
So the on Fairmount, does it look like it's primarily right there is just on-street parking?
Yes, there is a lot of on-street parking right there that are used by the students attending WSU, but the parking for the project would be on-site, according to the site plan.
Kind of like what's existing right now in parking, they're just going to extend it down a little bit further?
Well, the parking exists here now. What doesn't exist is this building on this vacant lot. That would be a new structure, but that parking exists there now. And I don't know if they have some kind of agreement that allows students to park there or not, because this building is not in use at this point.
That building that they're proposing, they're also building in parking on that other side, on that east side also?
Let me go back to the aerial.
Yeah, let's go back to the area.
Okay, so here is the parking that's existing now. And what you're seeing on the site plan is a new building in this location and one in this location. So they have the parking only goes, it's one way. You come in off 16th and then you go down and out the existing drive on the south side of the existing building.
So what you're saying is correct. what we're seeing on the site plan, that is the existing parking as is now, but they're gonna add 2 more buildings.
That's correct.
Okay,
They're
that's-
adding,
That's why I wanted to clarify. I just didn't know
Yes.
if they were adding additional parking on that site also or not, so that's why I was asking.
no, for the number of spaces, number of units that they have, their site plan does provide the required parking per code.
Okay, thank you.
Foster.
Kathy, the question I had is on the site plan. On the south side there is a 15-foot buffer noted, and if I recall correctly, that would be a landscape buffer required.
I'm going to let the applicant, or the agent is here, I'm going to let him answer that question. Right now, there is no, I mean, there's trees along that. Hold on just a minute, let me get to a. Okay, so there's a row of trees this is, the driveway is right there where the picture, I've taken the picture from looking north. So there is vegetation there currently, so that would remain.
I know it's a preliminary diagram, but my question is more so staff related in that would the building projecting into that buffer as well as the drive, which eats up about 80% of it, is that allowed?
This building you're talking about.
Right.
That's the existing building, so that exists as it is. And then this is the existing,
I don't think is that drive existing?
no, no, you're right. Right now it comes out straight.
I just think it's a consideration going forward, whether it's going to work.
So the existing driveway is right here, and it comes, you can see on the aerial where it's, where the driveway comes out, and then you can see the trees and whatever right there. So it looks like it's gonna come around this way and then come up. The new entrance is gonna be north of where that existing drive is.
Any other questions from the commission? Thank you, Kathy.
They've got it drawn on there.
What would you like to have up, the site plan?
Well, I'd ask agent or applicant to step forward, please. Provide your name and address, and you have 10 minutes.
Kirk Miller, K.E. Miller Engineering, 117 East Louis, and we're fine with the staff comments, and I'd be happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Got a question. Kirk, I'm looking at the Google Street View here, and it's unclear to me that the line of trees across on the south end, are those on this property or the neighbor's property?
I don't know. We haven't done a survey of it, so I couldn't tell you for sure.
Let me ask it a different way. Will you need to remove those trees in order to keep that driveway there?
I don't see any reason they would. It's an existing driveway. They're not planning on doing anything different with the driveway or the parking lot. Their plan right now is they're going to add the 2 buildings.
Yeah, not planning to expand the width of that driveway, but to leave it like it is?
Right.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Thank you. And we will move to the audience. Is there anybody that wants to speak on this case? Provide your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is John Myers, 1057 North Coolidge, Wichita, 67203. I own the duplex immediately to the south of this project. First, this is an area where the city encourages infill and increased density. And I think that's good. I think that's good for the neighborhood. I think that everything, it's a pretty good neighborhood, but it will improve as we increase that density. That said, I have a couple of concerns, and they have to do with that South Drive. I would ask one of two things. One, either that the commission defer action on this so that the agent or somebody with this development company would discuss with me the line of trees and that south border. I haven't had any communication with them. Alternatively, I would ask that the commission, if it doesn't defer it, like I would request, to require as a condition of the permit that there be an 8-foot fence constructed so that the increased traffic from the vehicles isn't going to be hitting the duplex where I have two very good longstanding tenants. And in addition, that there be some sort of condition so that the trash receptacles be at least 30 feet off the south line, because there's no reason my tenants should need to have to deal with the extra smell and noise. And it doesn't appear as if moving it off that south line would affect anybody else other than my tenants. Some of the commissioners had questions about those trees and the drive. The drive is there. It is old. It is cracked. It is busted. I don't see how they're going to put in a new development without completely repaving that. My concern would be that repaving it and the work they'd have to do would result in those trees dying or being killed. In which case, what sort of buffer do we have? In terms of who owns the trees, I don't know either. I'd love to have a survey to see who owns those trees or whether in fact the drive is on their property or not. It's unclear where exactly that drive stops because there's a lot of debris and such over there, and it's in such poor shape you can't really tell. So I know I only have about 30 seconds left. Again, I'd ask the commission to defer this. I think it's a good development. I think that a discussion could take care of some of these problems. But failing that, I sure would ask for an 8-foot fence that made of something that would keep any light from hitting my tenant's duplex and moving the traffic back. Thank you.
Questions on the commission? Mr. Warren?
Can you show us, with using the mouse there in front of it, could you show us approximately where your duplex is located?
Yes. Let's see here. Is there a mouse? Whoop. I know how to do that now, but I'm not getting a mouse. There it is. Good. Cool. So,
How about going to the aerial?
oh, this will be the best probably.
Okay.
Yeah. So the duplex, mine, I think faces the Fairmount Street at about the same setback as the property. Here would be the northwest corner of my property. The duplex probably comes back to about right here on the northeast. I'm approximately 15 feet off the lot line, wherever it is, like they are. Although
Directly
I've got
south?
to the south, yes. I've got a porch that goes about 5 feet further to the north. Really, with all of the increased car traffic coming down that lot right up against my tenant's back porch, that's a concern to me. Not that it can't be resolved, but that's my concern.
Other questions on the commission? Mr. Foster?
Staff will need to assist on this, but this is going to require a buffering and screening. And I'm assuming it's going to require, will it require the solid screening?
The existing trees, if they are evergreen, as long as they're there, would comply with the screening requirement.
If they're on this property?
Well, even if they're on the other property, as long as they're there, we don't make somebody put up a fence next to another fence just because it's on the other property. As long as the screen is there, whether it's on either side, if he chose to cut those trees down, then, and they were on his side, then this applicant would be required to provide the screening on his side. But as long as
Each
there's,
time I've looked at the ordinance, it doesn't matter regardless what the adjacent is.
we don't make people double
It's-
screen.
I'd look at the ordinance. I'd check that one.
I know I haven't been asked a question, but if I may, those trees do not, that's
Wait
not
just a second.
screened.
Mr. Blick?
So on your duplex, it faces east and west.
Yes,
It's along that drive.
That's right.
So the the front doors of the people that's in your homes, are they facing to the north or to the south?
They're faced to the south.
And they park on the west side or on the south side?
They park on the west side. We're actually right next to the current driveway, comes straight this way instead of coming up here. I don't see how some of the driveway cut isn't on my property, but but immediately to the south of that is where my tenants park.
So to clarify, the back doors of your duplex will then be facing this to the north side where that drive would be?
Yes, and there's a porch back there. It's not like it's not used.
You're about 15 feet, you said, from that drive, is that correct?
Yeah, thereabouts. I haven't measured it, but it's about the same.
Okay, just to clarify with staff, so if the trees had to come out because of the driveway perhaps, then a screening would have to be reinstalled.
Let's say the trees are on the applicant's property
Right.
and they redo the driveway and it requires removal of those trees, then they would be required to provide the zoning screening.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, commissioners.
If anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case, you'll go to the podium and provide your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Nella Bayouth, and I'm at 163 Rutland Court. I'm the owner of Cedar Mills Property Management, and I manage quite a few properties. One that's just immediately to the east of this development, the apartments to the north, Caddy Corner, pretty much all around there. We're generally supportive to see things happen in the area. I was just curious if there was any consideration for our property to the east in terms of any fencing or noise abatement, things of that nature. It would be.
Now, can you point to where you're?
Yeah, so this property right here is the one immediately adjacent to it that we manage. I also manage this property, these right here, and one across the street that's right next to the church. Like I said, I'm generally supportive. We're just kind of wanting a little bit more information to make sure that this change will not negatively impact our tenants as well, as we've done some renovations and investment into the property, so we want to make sure that's preserved. The other question I would have is regarding the historic environs, Kathy, and how that all plays into effect. I'm just kind of curious because
The state environs law was repealed in July of 2013, so there is no review of projects that are located in proximity to listed properties.
So as far as the type of construction, then the other question I would have is, if there's any more information they could provide or if that's even been discussed.
The applicant can answer that in rebuttal.
Could I sit down and let him answer?
Does the commission have any questions? Thank you. Do you have anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Okay, seeing none, if the agent would like to come up and you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
We will naturally follow whatever screening's required on this, whether it's a fence or landscaping, that type of thing. As far as the material of the new structures, I have no idea. I don't think they've gotten that far. They're just trying to figure out what they can get on there. Well, they need to get the zoning in first, and that's what we're here for today. But as soon as they have that figured out, then they'll go ahead and start preparing plans as to what these structures are going to look like. But at this point, to my knowledge, they haven't progressed that far. You don't want to spend too much money without knowing you can do what you want to do.
Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Glick?
This is kind of a silly question. Are you going to put some signage that's over there on Fairmont that says it's an exit only? Because I could see with that ingress coming in there, just that flow and all that on-site parking that's over there is going to be kind of a nightmare for that one drive that's down there. Is it a problem right now or not, or?
I don't know if it's a problem or not. I mean, from looking at the pictures that Kathy put up there, that looks like that drive's still used quite a bit and people park there. I'm assuming it's students that park there right now, so.
Sounds good.
Apparently if everybody's figured it out so far, but, you know, if it's an issue, I'm sure they'll put some up.
Any other questions from the commission?
Thank you.
That I will bring it back to the commission for action.
It approves per staff's recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Blick to approve, subject to staff recommendations, and a second by Mr. Dool. Other discussion? No other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 10-0. Thank you. Moving on to item number 9, case number ZON 2018 0003.
a request before you go. Could you turn everything up a little bit for me so I can hear better?
Can't turn it up, but if we can ask everybody to speak.
Yeah, we can ask
Speak
everybody to
up.
speak
We can
up.
speak up.
Okay, no problem. City zone change from SF5 to LI.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave Yearout with planning staff. This is a request submitted on behalf of Mr. Lang, the owners. He owns the company that owns this property. We're on the south side of 47th Street. The east side of the property is where it's platted as McLean Boulevard. Doesn't exist, but that's what the plat calls that right of way. The outline here on the property zoning map, you can see it's zoned SF5, as is the property to the south, the north, and most of the property to the west. We've got multifamily zoning to the west, and then on for the west, you've got both commercial property zoned at Seneca, and then a mobile home park zoning that exists on South Seneca. Everything to the east is already zoned LI, limited industrial. Here's the aerial photo of the property in question. Property to the south is undeveloped. You can see there's an industrial building to the east, and then you get northeast, you've got a church, and then the call center that currently exists there on 47th Street. This identifies the general area in relationship to the future land use map and the comp plan. It's also in the South Wichita Hayesville plan area, a combination of new residential and adjacent to employment area identified in the future land use. This is looking east along 47th Street. You can see the sidewalk that exists. This is the edge of the commercial building that is existing east of the property. This is looking northeast. You can see the church and then the call center that exists on the north side of 47th Street. This is looking northwest from the site. North of 47th Street, you have a series of homes that exist along 47th Street. Looking west along 47th Street, again, you can see the sidewalk that exists in this area, and then the highway, and then the improvements that exist on 47th Street. This is kind of looking southwest at the site. We're close to the area that's the right-of-way for McLean, and then you have the tree row, and then a bunch of ag buildings that exist on the property that you can see from the aerial exists on the property, roughly in this location. And this is looking essentially straight south. This is almost, if you will, down where McLean Boulevard goes. It's also platted as a drainage area, and we've got drainage that goes south from that location. That's the end of the pictures. As it noted in the zoning case and the zoning map, you can see We have industrial zoning to the east. This is a large open area. There are generally utilities available into the area. Water exists on 47th Street. Sewers are to the further to the west. There's also sewers that exist to the east. If they come forward with, this is unplatted land, so it would have to be platted in order for development and construction to occur. The platting process would identify issues with respect to extension of utilities as well. There had been submitted a proposal to vacate McLean Boulevard, essentially from 47th Street all the way down to where it butts up to the railroad tracks. However, the owners of the property that own the mobile home park, El Cadillo, they also own this land all the way over to the proposed the right-of-way for McLean, and they were not party to that petition. So it's Lang is in the process of trying to get them involved with that. Mr. Lang or his companies own all of the land to the south. They also own this property, and they own most of these lots that are vacant further south of the El Cadillo property. Whether or not we'll come forward later with a vacation petition or not, we don't know. It's been discussed. But this is a step to expand the industrial zoning to the west to accommodate presumed future industrial development on that property. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions from the commission? Thank you, Dave. So I would ask agent or applicant to step forward and to present on this case. And you know the rules.
You sure? Knowing them and following them, yeah. Russ Avey, agent for the applicant with Boffman Company. I'll be brief and to the point. This zoning request is mainly to shore up land use rights for Lang Properties, which staff just mentioned owns quite a bit of land in this general area. It's all part of their master plan for South Wichita, if you will, called Crossgate. Having said that, there's no specific use for the expansion of Red Guard from the east to come onto this property. This site is being rezoned, as I understand it, just simply to take it one next step to being marketable for development. So we do not have the ability to stand here and specifically discuss what project would perhaps go on this property. In speaking with Mr. Bishop, who you'll hear from in just a moment, there was a number of questions, very, very straightforward questions about what uses are permitted and, more importantly, what uses are going to be eliminated. And I really, quite frankly, can't speak to that at this juncture. So we understand that District Advisory Board 4 is going to hear this on October 1st. I think is probably shaping up in my discussions with Mr. Bishop that perhaps deferring this until after the District Advisory Board allows us to develop a protective overlay with the neighbors to see if we can get this into a little bit more palatable form prior to that District Advisory Board and then prior to action by the Planning Commission. So I'll stand for any questions. Otherwise, I'll let Mr. Bishop speak. Yes, sir.
Question, to the west of that is a church that is pretty close to that property line. Later on, when you actually do the site plan and all that, then that's when they'll start talking about any barriers or anything separating that property from that church and stuff, or there's noise and all that stuff. Is that when that will take place?
Sure. So we'll have a whole host of things from compatibility setbacks to, the zoning setbacks are a little bit weaker than the compatibility setbacks. So the compatibility setbacks will trigger here, and we'll obviously have the screening requirements of the code as well as the landscape ordinance since we are adjacent and adjoining residential property. So, quite frankly, that'd be some of the detail that could potentially come into play on the protective overlay. Additional setbacks would be something that could be considered during the subdivision of the property, which would be at a later date. And then all of that would actually be implemented at the time that the site's developed.
Awesome.
Correct.
Thanks for clearing that up. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Any other questions from the commission? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience that would like to? Yes, sir. if you'll step to the podium, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, please.
I'm starting when I'm up here.
Yes.
My name's Jack Lee, and where's the mouse? This property right there is mine, 642 West 48th Street South. This is the church property. It's to the west of this proposed change right here. Laclede right here is a dirt road. It's one of the questions I have, will there be any access off Laclede into that property? Anyway, that's one of my questions. The other one is, has there been a environmental study done to this property? I'm on groundwater and septic system, and I don't want any pollution, any more pollution on that area if I could help it. I have a good water softener, but still. The traffic, I'm worried about the traffic. Do you know that they're going to either put an underpass or an overpass on the railroad tracks eventually? I think that's planned for like 24, 23 sometime. You know that? Gee, let me look at my things. I'm a little nervous. 3 minutes, huh? Will they pay for if the road is vacated, will they pay for that part of the road, or does that just become part of the property? That's one of the questions I have. They talk about a master plan. How can I see that master plan for that area? I don't plan on leaving that area anytime soon. I mean, I have an acre and some right there now. I don't know why that's all in brown there. Can you tell me why that's in brown? Why this is in brown?
It's the zoning color designation.
There's a house there. That's a residential area. There used to be a treatment center there, but that brown right there is there's a house there. Okay. I'm worried about Laclede. I'm worried about 48th Street South. There's only 2 owner-occupied houses on this street. So I don't think we have much of a voice in the running of our government. The church is there. They're concerned with the access on Laclede. I'm concerned about, are they going to want access off Laclede into this property sometime soon? With 2 property owners in the church, the spatials that would come on with paving that property would be exorbitant for me.
Sir, your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute? Your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
No.
No?
I just want, you know that used to be Osage Indian land. Did you know that? How many of you have been down there and looked at that area?
Would you like
You
an
know,
additional
before you-
1 minute?
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
A question for him.
I have a question for
Sorry.
him too.
We have a question for you. Mr. Richardson.
Yep,
Yes.
you're on our time now.
Okay.
So help me understand. So your access and your neighbor's access is off of 48th Street? You'll need to stay at the.
Yeah. If you can't hear, he's asking about your access, and yes, he lives over here on 48th. Currently, he comes down Laclede, which is a gravel road, and goes onto 48th Street to get to his home, yes.
Okay, so that's, all right, thank you. Well, it's a dead-end street, right?
Sir, you'll have to go back to the podium to speak because it's being recorded and we need to capture what you're saying. Thank you.
JACK. What?
Is there
questions?
any other questions from the
Yeah.
commission?
Yes, my question.
It's been answered.
Oh, it's been answered. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Thank you. You'll provide your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is James Bishop. My address is 4696 Gold Street.
I live directly across the street, across 47th Street to the north in that neighborhood. The reason I'm here today, our concern is the broad swing of the zoning change. We're at SF5 now, as I understand, and I'm certainly no expert or very knowledgeable actually about the zoning things, but I've done a little research here, and we went from basically one end of the spectrum nearly to the other. The LI, as I understand, is only one. There's only one least restrictive, less restrictive zoning change that could be made to this. So we're concerned about some of the concerns the other gentleman had, the noise, the traffic, those kinds of things. And then the fact that I talked with Mr. Huey, and I apologize, I hope I get your name right there, but we had a okay, we had a brief discussion, and so we'll continue that dialogue and going forward participate with the DAB meeting coming up here to try to learn more information about this. But also I learned in our brief conversation, excuse me, a few minutes ago that currently there is no development plan for that property. It's merely a house cleaning or a housekeeping area, but it just seems to me and to us that it's too broad of a swing if there's no development plan, then why do we need to change this zoning category? Why not wait until there is a plan developed, or at least some kind of a vision to come back and then request the zoning change for this area? So I guess we would just request that there be a deferral to this approval or approval of this change in zoning until there's more information, some more discussion amongst the neighborhoods and the developers' representatives. That's all I have. Thank you. I'd stand for any questions if you have any.
A question.
Yes, sir.
So you're on the north side of 47th Street, and then over on Palisade, it is limited industrial also. And right on the corner of 47th and Palisade is Royal Caribbean.
Yes.
And it's mostly office, and then across the street, it looks like there's a lot of office. So do you hear a lot of noise, or is there a lot of issues with that overall Palisade? And right now, it's at limited industrial right now.
Yes, we have some, I'm not sure the mouse, I'll see if I can. Okay, that helps a lot. Our property is right here where the arrow is. Excuse me. This property here that you're referring to, there's a drainage ditch that runs here on this blue line, the McLean right-of-way that the other gentleman referred to. There is a generator right in this area right here that's related to the call center facility that's here. There's also a trash service, or was farther to the north here down Palisade. But this generator runs on Wednesday mornings, and I can hear it very well. On some days when the wind's blowing just right, the smell is a little obnoxious. Now, I'm not sure that it's a huge health hazard. It's not going to kill anybody, but it is a bit of a concern for us every time it runs. So the concern we all have, the neighbors that I've talked to, not everyone yet, is that we would just like to be involved in this up front so that we know how it's developing out, hopefully have some positive input into it. We're not opposed to improving the area, building more businesses, whatever, but we want to be sure that our residents here, this is a neighborhood that was built in 1950, thereabouts, not a high-income neighborhood, but yet there's lots of folks that have lived there, like this other gentleman just spoke, lived there their entire lives, or most of them. So we'd like to try to preserve as much as we can to keep it where it's amicable for everyone involved.
Any other questions from the commission?
Thank
you. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? If not, I will have the agent come back up for rebuttal. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Russ Avey, again, agent for the applicant. Less of a rebuttal, more of just kind of touching on some of these questions. The vacation case that was attempted before we had all the owners up and along the right-of-way sign, I think that is still something that we're actively pursuing. So we would probably, hopefully, if we do get cooperation from other landowners, you'll be seeing that at subdivision committee, hopefully by the end of the year. To answer the gentleman's questions, the street right-of-way would be divided equally down the center line, with adjoining property owners getting their, not in this case, it was all dedicated by one owner? Okay, so the reversionary rights of vacation cases go to the land that was, that the right-of-way was dedicated from, to answer your question. And no, it's not paid for. It was dedicated free of charge, and it gets returned to the owner after a vacation case, free of charge, if you will. I don't think we would have any expectations of being able to have access to Laclede Street. If we were to somehow request that, we would probably, at the time of subdividing this property, platting this property, being on the hook for the paving cost of that. So it's a lose-lose situation, I think, from our standpoint, to have any interaction with the Laclede other than to maintain whatever we need to maintain in its existing condition. So our access presumably would come from the north off of 47th Street only, and we would have to wall off and landscape and otherwise screen that Laclede side with no access, would be my assumption. And as I mentioned, I think the two gentlemen who spoke here kind of gave you the reasons why probably a deferral at this point would behoove everybody, so we would have the ability to come back with a more complete protective overlay. But if you choose to unanimously approve this straight up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the commission? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
I would move to defer it past the District Advisory Board and working out a protective overlay with the staff.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Richardson, a second by Mr. Blick. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 10-0. Thank you.
Question, do you want to defer that to a definite date so we don't have to re-advertise?
Yeah, tell us the date and I'd be happy to, yeah.
Mr. Avey?
Well, if the applicant is agreeable, I would recommend that you do this on the 18th of October.
Is that the first one?
No, October 4th is the next one, but we're not going to be done. And won't
You
get staff.
underestimate me?
Well, we won't have staff report out by then.
The 18th's fine. Yeah.
October 18th.
Move the, amend the motion to include come back here on October 18th.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Richardson, a second by Mr. Blick. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 10-0. With that, we will adjourn the meeting of the MAPC, and we will move into the Board of Zoning Appeals.
They're gone, so.
So it appears that the applicant for this case has left the building. So we can move to do this on consent, or we can go ahead and go through and hear the case. Whatever's the will of the commission.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
What about the minutes for the meeting
Oh, I
on
forgot the
September
minutes.
6th?
You're supposed to keep me straight.
You talk so fast, you didn't have a
I'm
chance.
anxious, yeah, I thought we'd pass that part.
All right, let's go back to approval of the
Move that
minutes.
we approve the minutes of September 6th.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Green, a second by Mr. Warren to approve the minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 10-0. Before we adjourn, The only thing else that other matters is, because we went into a new year, we have to do some changes on the committee. So Mr. Warren is going to move to the Advanced Plans Committee and will chair that committee. As a result, I'll need somebody that's an appointee from the county to move to the subdivision committee. And I will also need a new chair for that committee. So that committee meets twice a month.
We already
We've
got a
already got
chair.
it.
Already been selected.
Oh, the chair's already been selected.
He's vice chair.
Is that, are you
Yeah.
the chair?
Foster's the vice chair.
Okay, so all I need then is somebody that will move from that.
Sedgwick County.
And who are
A
the
Sedgwick County appointee that will move from advanced plans to subdivision.
candidates for that from the county?
Would be Mr. Daly, Mr. Blick,
Joe Johnson.
and Joe Johnson. I think that's it. There's three.
Move that we appoint Joe Johnson to be That'll teach you not to be here.
Well, Bob, you're on that too.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, you get to appoint it, right?
Oh,
As the chair. You can make the
I
decision.
get to appoint the chair. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, Mr. Joe Johnson. That's what happens when you don't show up. Meeting adjourned.